All right, we're all good. Good morning. I feel like I'm giving a lecture at class or uni or something. This is very formal. I'm not used to that. I'm used to screaming children and yelling teenagers and lots of families, which is awesome, which I'm sure you all were once or have or know, so that's great. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. My name is Carla Bignaska, or Bignaska if you're Italian. I pronounce my name incorrectly. I also have the name Bigsy. I broadcast on Mix 106.3 here in Canberra, and I do the breakfast show from 5:30 till 9, where I've just come from. So if I pause for a 3.5-minute ad break, I do apologise because I'm still in mode here. And I'm very pleased to chair today's seminar. I would like to thank our speakers ahead of time today, Miss Mia Garlick, the Head of Communications and Policy for Facebook in Australia and New Zealand. I apologise profusely if I've ever contravened any of your policies. And Mr John Sheridan, the Australian Government's Chief Technology Officer. John is with the Department of Finance. Miss Kate Bowmaker, the Manager of Indigenous Communication and Engagement Section in the Department of Social Services. Also, we have Mr Steve Davies, the founder of Ausloop, and Mr Prem Vasudevan, the Manager of Social Media Communications at the Department of Immigration and Border Protection. I'd also like to thank those people who couldn't attend in person and who are logging in remotely. In addition to the live streaming, we are also receiving questions via Twitter using the hashtag IPAA social media, so hashtag IPAA social media, and throughout live chat that's linked through the website. Before we start today's proceedings, I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I also acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. All right, today the topic under discussion is social media and its impact on communications. It's a pretty hot button topic at the moment. There's been much media coverage involving public servants. This morning is a perfect example, and their alleged use or misuse of social media in connection with their employment. At this point, I guess I would like to make the disclaimer that the views of the speakers at this seminar are not necessarily the views of the IPAA ACT. Again, I apologise in advance if I say anything where my both feet might be in my mouth. All right, I guess at this point in time, keep your phones on, keep your iPads on. If you want to interact in any way via the hashtag, Twitter hashtag, via Facebook, in any way you want to communicate, it would probably be the only seminar where I encourage you to distract me via your mobile devices. I'm easily distracted anyway by shiny things. There's cameras here and everything, so don't worry about me. I'll look into the distance and look vacant. That happens often. So who here is on social media? Who's got a Facebook account? Who's got a Facebook account? What about a Twitter account? Who does microblogging? Pinterest? I'm not into Pinterest just yet. I like seeing photos of squirrels water skiing and that, but I can't be bothered to put them up on Pinterest. That's what Facebook and Twitter is for me. There's Tumblr, there's Flickr. There's so many applications, so many different social media applications, and I guess I might throw it to the audience to explain exactly why, if you would like to, explain if you have a social media platform, whether you have Flickr. Who has Flickr? Anyone into Flickr? You have Flickr. All right, I'm coming down. I'm coming down. I need a roving mic. I am interested, coming from the private sector, obviously, if you're in the public service, exactly what you use your social media for in terms of your job. I guess for me, we're no longer just broadcasters. We're no longer just radio broadcasters. We're multi-platformed. We have to consider that what we do is touching and interacting with an audience in ways that we've never thought before. So the internet, I know that many years ago, I was lucky enough to work on a national platform, have a national radio show, and we were one of the first shows to introduce Twitter. And it was pretty groundbreaking at the time, and it was only about 4 or 5 years ago. But it allowed us to reach an audience that we hadn't been able to, in the sense that there was a time difference, say for example, between the East Coast and the West Coast of Australia, and all of a sudden kids were streaming us live via the internet and interacting with the show instantaneously. And I guess that's why there's some criticism that perhaps radio might be I'm not going to say a dead medium, a dying medium. It isn't, because we're still going to want to drive in our cars and listen to our favourite radio presenters in the morning, find out the news and things that you can't when you're otherwise distracted. Maybe you're at home making breakfast, and I guess that's what the TV is for as well, but we're interacting on so many different levels. You're not just watching television anymore, you're watching television and you're commenting on how tone deaf that contestant is on X Factor, or, you know, I'm on the radio but we're starting a conversation with people on Facebook that might already be at work. So I guess that's the beauty for myself in the application of social media and the job that I do. But if you don't mind, I might come around and just ask exactly why you use social media in your own forums and what message you like to get across. All right. I feel like Phil Donahue, come on down. Tell us about your problems. All right.
Hi,
good morning.
Good morning.
What was your name?
My name is Govert Melink.
And what social media platforms are you on?
I'm on LinkedIn for my business-related stuff. For my friends that live all over the globe, I'm on Facebook, and I use things like Flickr, especially to share photographs and other sort of multimedia kind of stuff with family that lives in Europe. I guess
the beauty of Flickr is that you are able to share photos and put photo albums online with people that live. We are a global audience now. We have family all around the world. I know I do. I live as far away as possible from my family, being in Canberra and then being in other countries. Is it true for you?
Yeah, pretty much.
And I guess the other thing is you're not clogging up your phone with data storage, but also, do you find that you are two very separate people between your LinkedIn account and your personal account compared to your professional account?
Yeah, I think that one of the key things is that, you know, Facebook is where you do lots of frivolities and you share that with the people that you actually want to share that with, and LinkedIn is a bit more public because clients tend to look there to find out what you're doing and what you've been up to, so you have to be a bit more careful about that.
For those of us who have entered the workplace, I guess with the advent of Facebook, maybe we started out with a really cool Hotmail account, say, I don't know, you were littleangel_69@hotmail.com, and you now probably regret that, or perhaps the things that you've posted on your Facebook profile. Is there anyone here that's had to remove a profile or adapt or change or edit? Anyone? So we're all aware of what we put on the internet stays on the internet. Okay, that's good. Class dismissed. Is anyone else on social media for their job in the public service? I'm interested in this particularly. Yep, oh, you're making me work. Okay. All right. I'm interested because it's really difficult to find that balance between your pushing your message and your agenda across without sounding like a full business, or you're communicating a message that's entirely corporate or entirely business. So how do you find that balance between the message you want to put across and without being too censored, I guess?
Mainly, my organization, we have a Twitter account, and we use it primarily just when something happens, just to share a development or point directly towards something. We don't necessarily use Twitter or tweet just for the sake of saying, today we have to put something out. So we're linking to a product, or we're linking to a report, or advising of a new development, and that's the only thing we use it for. We don't use it for commentary or editorial at all. Okay, so we're not going to find updates from you about, I'm going to the toilet. Not for professional. Not especially. Okay. It's funny. Here's the difference. I'm encouraged by my employer to post as much as possible via our Facebook page. I'm pretty good with Twitter because that seems to be fairly easy and attracts my attention span for long enough with 140 characters. And the encouragement is the more you speak, the more you interact, the more you're out there with your audience. But I feel like that just contributes to noise. But the idea that you're always doing something in the community, we're very community focused at Mix 106. And I guess, I'm at the shops at Jammo and I'm buying my stuff from Aldi, is interesting to some people, but it's how you put that message across, I guess. And am I back on mic? This is very professional. I'm not used to this. And it's how you put that message across without it sounding like, it's an ad break, or it's a commercial sponsorship agreement, or whether it comes across as quite genuine. So I guess even if using social media is not part of your job description in the public sector, government agencies are using these tools to project government policies, as we just discovered there. And
it's out there. There are individuals who will offer commentary on what government agencies are saying, sometimes to the detriment of their employment, as we found out this morning. It will be of no surprise to you that Facebook, when I asked, Facebook is the most prominent media tool, a social media tool rather. I'm a media tool. Today, we are fortunate to have Miss Mia Garlick from Facebook Australia and New Zealand. Now, before her gig at Facebook, Mia was the Assistant Secretary at the Department of Broadband Communications and the Digital Economy. Previous jobs for Mia also included being the Product Counsel for YouTube and the General Counsel for Non-Profit Creative Commons. She also has a mutual friend of mine in Sydney, and I don't know if she knows that yet, but I hope that she's looked at it. I would like you to welcome, please, Miss Mia Garlick.
Hey, thanks. Great, awesome. Thanks so much. That was an amazing introduction. So I'm really excited to be here today. Because I'm the first speaker, I thought I would do a little bit of scene setting, a little bit different to Carla, because I'm less of a personality and used to public speaking. So I just wanted to sort of do a bit of scene setting and just sort of talk about how I think that communications are shifting in terms of how people are getting their information and interacting with information and content online, and then also sort of what that means for government, and finish up with 2 case studies. So I just wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the scale that we're talking about. It was great to hear about sort of you using Facebook to connect with your friends, but I think sometimes each of us are using social media in our own little personal way, and we don't sort of take that step back to think about the magnitude of what we're talking about. And these are the title slides, just in case anyone didn't know what they looked like and who we all were. So on Facebook, there's over 1 billion people who are actively using the site. And so that's not, you know, that Hotmail account that you set all those years ago and never went back to because you forgot the password, or, you know, you moved on to the next thing. It's people who are actively checking into the site at least once every 30 days. And in terms of the volume of interactivity and engagement, there's over 4.5 billion likes generated every day. That's a stat from May this year, and that's an increase of about 67% since August the year before. So we're seeing an increase in the number of people who are logging into the site and interacting and engaging. There's over 4.75 billion items of content shared on Facebook each day. Again, it's an increase in the 12 months since before that. And here in Australia, there's 12 million people who are actively using the site each month, and there's 9 million Australians connecting each day. So to me, that suggests that social media and the social web is an increasing way that people are connecting and sharing information and discovering information through friends or through pages. Particularly, I've seen some great examples of radio stations kind of using it as this sort of ongoing connection tool with the audience, so that you're not just using it as a broadcast tool, but you're also posting up questions and then integrating that into the show and keeping that ongoing connection. But it's also then an increasingly integral part of sort of daily Australian life. And so I think that then brings us to, and then I also wanted to flag, it's not just Facebook, it's also sites like Instagram, which has only been in existence for a little over 2 years, already up to 150 million users with 19 billion items, photos shared, and 1.2 billion likes per day, which is quite impressive for a site that started out as a small phone app and has quickly amassed a really passionate following. So I think, what does that sort of mean for how we're communicating with the public, and how we're sort of on the government side of things are trying to get our message out to people, and thinking about sort of what their current practices are and what the trends are and how they're communicating with people. And this is a slide from the 2012 US presidential candidate Mitt Romney's team, where they did a poll to kind of figure out where people were getting their information as they were trying to, win the 2012 US presidential election. And they worked out that 2 million voters in the swing state of Ohio were no longer watching live TV. So that has fairly profound implications. People are either recording it beforehand, they're either watching it on catch-up TV, or they're getting it from iTunes or one of the other sort of online download services. People are still engaging with TV, but it it changes. They're watching it when they want, how they want. And so I think the implication from that is you need to start thinking about amplification so that you're getting people across different platforms, so that you're getting their attention at that moment in time when they're actually focused on that particular piece of content, because you can't just assume that everyone's sitting there on the couch diligently watching through the entire broadcast live anymore. And so it really just changes a little bit in terms of your strategy of how you're trying to communicate out to people. Another interesting fact comes from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, which recently released a report that said that up to 3.3 million Australians no longer have a landline at home. So people are increasingly on the mobile, and we're certainly seeing that at Facebook. The shift to mobile has been happening rapidly. We've got over 7 million of the active monthly 12 million Australians who are accessing Facebook from a mobile device. And when they're on the mobile, you're also seeing engagement increase because you've got the internet in your pocket, so you can just sit there and quickly flick through, get information and share content and like and comment on things constantly throughout the day. So it's an ongoing connection. I also just wanted to sort of take a step back and sort of think about what this means for government, in the sense of, you know, often I read discussion papers or issues papers that come out of departments in Canberra, and they're sort of talking about, here's this social media, or here's this public policy problem, and, you know, what are the solutions to do this? And then there's sort of this sub-paragraph, five pages in, that says, and now there's social media, as in, now it's all sort of over, you know, sort of pack up your things and run for the hills, because there's this amazing force that's been unleashed and we're not quite sure about what to do about it. But I want to take a step back for a moment and think about what is social media and sort of what is a site like Facebook. This is a map that one of our interns created in 2009 that shows all the friendship connections between people all over the world on Facebook. So it would have changed a little while in the interim years. But I think it gives you that sort of bigger holistic picture that this is really a global communications network that is happening real time and at scale all around the world. And people often talk about social media as being something new. You know, Facebook's been around for 9 years. Instagram, as I mentioned, is only a couple of years old. But in some respects, social platforms like Facebook are very old. People have been wishing each other happy birthday for a very long time. People have been sharing photos of what they did on holidays. They've been telling stories about their day. They've been saying what they think of Carla's show, or responding to questions that she asks on air, you know, for as long as she's been broadcasting. So people naturally connect and share with people in their offline life, and now we're just able to do it online and do it in that sort of real-time, global, at-scale environment that is that has been sort of enabled through these kinds of social platforms. There was an interesting report released by McKinsey, I think it was last year, that sort of looked at, you know, what are the economic implications from all of this for businesses. And it's a McKinsey report, so there's a really big number. So the really big number is this one up here, that the use of social technologies could add 900 billion to 1.3 trillion to the global economy. And some of the things that they're thinking about there and sort of talking about is that ability to get real-time, instantaneous feedback from people. If there's a particular issue or there's a concern, people will start posting about it on, say, your Facebook page, and then if a lot of people start liking that comment, you've instantly got some feedback that there's an issue there or there's a concern. You can do lots of customer service via social platforms. We've increasingly seen that in both the telco sector and also amongst airlines and banks. You can also sort of co-create products, like put things out there and say, what do you think of this, and get some feedback and get some community participation in terms of what you're thinking about and working on. So there's a lot of different ways that sort of instantaneous kind of engagement cycle can help people sort of in large organisations like government agencies get sort of more people involved in the issue and challenge that they're looking at. So I guess I would sort of say that social media is really about allowing government agencies to take advantage of the power of word of mouth at scale. But a lot of people say to me, but Mia, Facebook is where I go and hang out with my friends. I don't really want to hear it from government in this space. And I think that's a valid sort of concern. But to that I say, here's, at the end of each year, we post up what the most talked about trends were on Facebook for that particular year. And in 2011, the census was the third most talked about thing on Facebook. because it is something that everybody does on one particular night of that particular year, and it is a common experience that we all share. And so that's where I say to you, I think that the work of government that you do, you might not touch everybody on exactly one night all around the country. You might not be consistently touching the same person with what your work is, but the work that you do impacts the public and it touches the public. Whether it's a policy division or a service division or you're running a program, your work is relevant to the public. People are talking about it in this space, and so therefore you need to think about how you engage in this space or what your strategy is so that you can be part of those conversations. And I have to confess, I was guilty as charged. I did the census with my husband, whose name's Duncan, and I complained because I wanted to write down Funster as my occupation, and because he's an economist, he said that I couldn't do that because economists use the census for serious economic analysis. So I'm guilty as charged right there. We've also, obviously this year we've had an election, and so at Facebook we've been trying to see what kinds of things people have been talking about. And, you know, around the budget and the budget in reply speech, we saw a lot of conversations around government programs as the then Prime Minister and the then opposition leader were making announcements and giving opinions about what government programs they were going to continue, what ones they were going to change, which ones they were going to cut. And so we saw big spikes in conversations around the baby bonus, disability care, Medicare, New Start and Gonski. So people are having these conversations in these spaces. And of course, the election itself has only just finished. From the time of when the election was called on the 4th of August to when the election happened on the 7th of September, we saw 12 million election-related mentions, over 12 million election-related mentions on Facebook. In terms of politicians that were being talked about the most, Tony Abbott was talked about the most, followed by Kevin Rudd and then Clive Palmer, who got a lot of airtime with the various comments that he made, and then Christine Milne. In terms of the issues that people were talking about, the most talked about issue was the budget and the economy, followed by gay marriage, then the asylum seekers and the NBN, followed by climate change. So this isn't a sentiment analysis. It's not saying that some people liked this issue more than that or liked the politician more than that. What it's saying is these were the ones that were just being talked about the most in general. And again, it's going to my point to say that people do have opinions about the work of government and the work of politics, and so they are talking about these things on this space, even if it's to their friends. But we all know from the offline world, we've been at barbecues and we've sat around dinner tables where people have had conversations, arguments, and possibly even the odd disagreement about particular government services or programs or particular things that are happening in Parliament House up on the hill here. So I think it's time to sort of rethink about this space and think about how to engage separately, and I'm sure that my fellow panellists have some great insights to share. I wanted to finish up with two case studies. The first is the Australian Electoral Commission. Again, it's quite timely. I loved this cover photo that they uploaded as they started counting the vote. There's nothing quite like seeing what it really is like when you're the one who has to flick through the ballot papers. They posted up some really engaging content during this whole year, actually. They gave information about, sort of how to vote properly. They gave information about overseas voting. They also adopted quite a good humorous approach in some of the images that they used, posted up reminders about when to vote. This was also something that I learnt. I did not know that the ballot was ordered by somebody picking out numbers using a blindfold. So that was something that I learnt through their content. They also engaged in some innovative apps. Facebook actually partnered with the Australian Electoral Commission on this Enrol to Vote initiative. And so it was a prompt to people to enrol to vote, and then they could share it with their friends and family in an effort to try to encourage those who either hadn't enrolled or hadn't checked their details recently to also do that. And then it was promoted in newsfeed. Malcolm Turnbull posted about it. The then Deputy Prime Minister Anthony Albanese also posted about it, and then the AEC and also Facebook, we promoted the post that we had created about it to try to really reach people, particularly in that younger demographic for whom social media might be a really key way that they're getting their information. The AEC also created an election day Facebook event so that you could say you were going to the election, and that would then post a notice in people's news feeds so that other people were sort of reminded that the election was happening, and they posted up information about where to find your polling booth and all of those kinds of things in the event. And then you had a reminder that appeared just in the top. There's an example there in your events tab in your Facebook account. They also use Facebook advertising to try to sort of reach the rest of the population beyond the people who are directly connected to their page, to remind people to make sure that they're enrolled and to change their address if they'd moved. So in terms of the results, they saw a 414% increase in their fan growth from the 1st of June, which is a pretty good increase for a government agency that probably most people don't necessarily think of first and foremost when they're thinking about the election, because they're busy focused on the politicians and the issues. The primary age group of people who were fans of the page and engaging with the page was people between the ages of 18 to 34-year-old, which is that sort of younger demographic. And they got some significant reach beyond the initial fan base. If you look here, this little black line, that's the number of new likes, and you can see that that's peaking when there are particular key moments happening. So, this would have been around the time of the election. But then this is the number of people who are talking about it. So the number of people who are liking and commenting and sharing on their stories, which is then pushing out their reach in terms of their audience beyond that initial fan base. And so that's sort of the secret sauce in terms of getting virality on a social platform. Over 7 million Australians saw Australian Electoral Commission content on Facebook. Over 85,000 people clicked through to their site from Facebook, and tens of thousands of Australians used the apps and joined the election event. I do just want to mention Prem's department here because I saw this and I was really excited. The department, I'm going to get your name wrong because I haven't read my administrative orders properly. It's Department of Immigration and Border Protection. Yes, right. So they have become, as far as I'm aware, the first Australian government agency to use Instagram video. They did an Instagram video competition for Australian Citizenship Day. I'm sure Prem has more details, but as I understood it, it was allowing all Australians, whether or not you were partaking in formal citizenship ceremonies, to affirm, why Australia is important to you. Usually the statement of affirmation takes around 13 seconds to say, and Instagram video is 14 seconds, so it seemed like a perfect fit. And they had some great entries. I think you only had a week to do it, so there was sort of a limited number of engagement. There was some great reach on Facebook and some really good entries that were posted on the site. So with that, I just wanted to finish up and see if there are any questions and let the others take it on from here. Thanks. I'll sit down.
Oh, you've lost me, Mia. You've taken my notes as well.
Oh, sorry.
I'll be flying blind.
There you go.
Thank you, darling. All right, does anyone have any questions for me in regards to Facebook? It's somewhat of a minefield for most of us, or for myself. It is purely a social media platform. I have my personal account and then obviously my work account, but it affects me and my line of work completely differently to how governments and policies can be adapted and used. And fascinating. I mean, here's a resource, a total minefield where we can navigate to reach so many people that we haven't been able to reach before, beyond the scope of what we do, engaging other people to be interested in whatever it might be that you're working on, that you want to engage in. So has anyone got any questions for me at all?
Hi, I'm Luke Heaton. I'm from the Department of Immigration and Border Protection. I was just wondering that there are a lot of upsides for social media and Facebook use, but Mia, did you have any views on the changing nature of people's understanding of privacy and their sort of greater willingness to share things that really I wouldn't be sharing with people? So yeah, I was just wondering if you could comment on how people are sort of differently perceiving their privacy and greater willingness to share things.
So I guess if you have more than 1 billion people on, and that's across all platforms, so maybe there's several billion people across all social media platforms sharing, I think each person probably does it in a way that makes sense for them. I mean, Facebook privacy is a really important issue, and we work on the philosophy that we want to give people the control to manage the information the way that they feel comfortable with. So, each time you post, you can choose which audience you want to share that with. And so I think people have different, just depending on their personality, depending on what they're interested in, people share differently across all the different platforms. And that's sort of one thing I think from some of the conversations I've had with people in government as well, that from the government perspective, you then want to think differently about your strategies on each platform because people are engaging in the platform slightly differently. I mean, Instagram is a place to share, to capture the world's moments and share photos. Twitter, there's a lot of public conversations there. Facebook, it's public and private, depending on what people choose. So I think people are using different platforms differently, depending on what works for them. But I don't think there's any sort of one model that works.
Anyone else have a question for Mia? All right, I have a question about the functionality of Facebook and how to, unfriend people without hurting their feelings, but we'll get to that afterwards. All right, now for our second speaker, Mr. John Sheridan. In February of this year, John was appointed as the first Australian Government Chief Technology Officer. I hope you have a key to your own bathroom because that sounds important. In addition to these responsibilities, he maintains the whole of government ICT. He's also the Australian Government Procurement Coordinator. In this position, he is tasked with assisting the business community in Australian government procurement matters. Please welcome John to the lectern.
I don't have my own bathroom. This is a 1979 hit by a guy called Roger Voudouris. I'm pleased to see that some of you in the audience probably can remember it, although I suspect that most of you can't. The notion that you might get used to something is, I think, very obviously correct in the area of social media and government. Mia and I have been talking to each other about this since 2009, and although we don't always agree, there's always been a lot of interesting discussion about what government might use social media for. Recently we were talking about a social media course to be put forward at the University of Canberra. And in the discussion, my view has always been, or has recently been, that we don't actually get asked so much why should we do social media in government anymore, but rather how should we do social media. Now that's not necessarily true across all departments or indeed across everybody in every department. But I think increasingly what you see all the time is the notion that people want to use social media and they want to find out the best way to do it to pursue government's objectives. And I don't find that particularly surprising when you look at the distribution of social media across the country at the moment. Mia mentioned that 12 million people in Australia use Facebook monthly or something like that. Now, that's it. You think about that and you think, well, OK, if 9 million use it every day, that's about 39% of the population. But just think about the 12 million for a moment. That's 50% of our population. About 20% of the population are less than 15, and I reckon some of those don't have Facebook accounts. About 5% of the population is more than 80, and I know that some of those probably don't have Facebook accounts. So what you're seeing is that a large proportion of that 12 million people sits in the age group between about 15 and 80. When you work out the stats, there's only about another half that number who are also in that population. So the number of people in that population using technology, using Facebook, outnumbers those who are not by 2 to 1. Now, I'd put it to you that you wouldn't actually understand that by reading today's media. If you read the mainstream media, you would get the impression that technology is leaving many of us behind. You seem to see the same stories and the same discussions time after time about how new some of this stuff is, about how different it is, about how it's changing things. I'd put to you that these figures show clearly that that isn't the case, that we've adopted this very greatly, and it's now the question of how we connect with people on social media. We know that about in the last month, the average unique viewers on YouTube from Australia was about 11.5 million. 3.6 million people use LinkedIn, 3.5 million use Tumblr, 2.2 million use Twitter. This is a really interesting feel for how you get your message across in government. And indeed, if you're not using in social media in government now, I'd again think that you're probably missing the audience. Because we also know that in the mainstream media, daily newspapers in the major capital cities sell about, or circulate, I don't think that's the same as sell, circulate about 1.3 million copies a day. So when you look at the amount of people using these other forms of media, it's not surprising that if government isn't using these forms, it's not going to connect to people and get its message across. We do need to be talking about how we do this, not about why we do it, or indeed should we do it. Now, our first use of social media, I think understandably, has largely been around broadcasting things. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily, because if you're going to miss out on a channel completely, at least broadcasting your message on that channel is going to connect you to it and to the people using it in a way that they might not see otherwise. Now, there are challenges about using these channels just to broadcast on, and we need to be aware of those. The average life of a tweet, if it's not picked up by anybody else, is about 2 hours. So thinking that you can get your message across just by sending a single tweet isn't going to hit the target. Indeed, one of the things I always find amusing about Twitter is to look at the people whose comments are the worst, whose comments are probably the most negative, the most sometimes hateful or spiteful. And I always look to see how many followers they have, because regularly you'll see that they've got less than 50 or less than 20 followers. Essentially, they would have been better off going down to the bus stop and shouting out their message there, because they would have reached more people, generally speaking. And we need to understand that in what we're doing in government as well. We need to understand that these channels are more than about broadcasting and more than about single bursts of information. Because if we just rely on those, we're not going to hit the target market. Now, there's a range of people across the government who are using these channels for more than communicating. There's a DHS site called Speech Bubble that they regularly use to consult their stakeholders. There are YouTube channels. There are consultation sites across other departments. The ATO has a range of videos about how to fill out your tax return. Now, I imagine their audience for that is somewhat cyclic, but at least it shows that people are using these new channels in order to get information across. But it offers us some interesting challenges in how we respond to these channels particularly. Some of those channels have got a lot of people looking at them. The tourism Twitter account at Australia has about 70,000 followers. The DFAT account has about 18,000 followers. I almost said Royal. The Reserve Bank of Australia account has 17,000 followers. There are 192 Twitter accounts that we have registered with Twitter through government. There are about 42 blogs, and I think it's about 64 YouTube channels in use. So clearly government is getting the message about communicating. The question is, are we going to the next steps which require more than communicating, which require us to do more than just shout out our message at the bus stop? I think in terms of consultation, we're starting to see that this can be workable. Now, consultation started off with the notion that we would ask questions in a blog and get comments. And we saw some particularly interesting challenges of social media in that context. We've seen challenges where we ask one question and we get answers to a whole lot of different questions on a blog site, such that it sort of hijacks the conversation. And we need to work out what it is we do about that. But of course, we're not alone in doing those things. The recent history of social media is replete with the number of commercial or business organisations that have decided to do something clever with a Twitter campaign and found it hijacked by people who have somewhat different views about their product than otherwise would be the case. We've also seen people use Twitter to actually address problems they see with particular companies or indeed with government and create discussions around that. One of the interesting things about these discussions on Twitter is how, to some extent, I think they've started to replace the mainstream media as the feeder for radio and television news stories during the day. Indeed, famously, if you watch Q&A on Monday nights, you can see the Twitter feed across the bottom of the screen. Now, recognising that that's moderated to some extent, and I imagine some of the more vociferous comments don't make it through, you can still see this interesting notion of people wanting to participate in what it is that they're doing, people wanting to get their message across. Now, you heard Mia say previously that this has always been the case to some extent, because people have historically written letters to the newspaper. They've complained about things. They've got together and submitted petitions to government. What social media has done has accelerated the turnaround of those things considerably, but also broadened the way we can use those media to get our message to people. As you heard, I do a fair bit of work in the procurement space. And one of the challenges of procurement has been for a long time around probity. The notion of how do we make sure that we maintain in government procurement a level playing field. Now, we do that by we've historically done that by releasing documents, having public company briefings for procurements at which we explain things. But because of the pressure of probity, we'd reached the situation that often I would get up for an industry brief. We'd have distributed the papers previously, and I would get up for an industry brief, and the first words I would say at the podium were, essentially paraphrasing them, "Nothing I'm going to say today makes any difference, because if it's not written down, you can't rely on it." And that's a challenge because of this notion of how do we tell everybody everything. Well, now we have a possibility, a channel in which we can do that, because using social media, we can actually publish our pre-tender documentation on our social media channel. We can ask anybody who wants to have a look at that and indeed to comment on it. We can make sure that we can reach all of the people all of the time, because if you're at all interested, this information is only a click away. We can use, of course, our other electronic sites to alert people to the information, and we can use Twitter and other things to point them in the right direction. But this possibility to consult with people about things is a big change in how we've done social media and how we continue to do it over time. And it's changing the way we start to construct our documents. Now, it's only at the start of this change, and I think that needs to be quite clear. How do we know it's only at the start? Because when we use these mediums or these channels for getting communications with people, what we discover relatively quickly is whereas people are very keen to read this information, they don't necessarily want their responses to be public. Now, this is also understandable. Companies working in this area have views around their intellectual property, don't want to give away their secrets to their competitors, but they do want to participate in the discussion. So what we're seeing increasingly is the notion that we will provide the information to people using social media, and they will email their comments back in so we can answer their questions. But immediately you can see, well, here's another trap for the unwary. If we start to answer individual questions directly to the people to ask them, there's a possibility that that level playing field has been tilted in a certain direction. And again, social media comes to our rescue. What it allows us to do is to paraphrase or anonymise those questions and put them out on the blog with a series of, if you like, FAQs or explanations, and say, we've been asked this generic question, here's the answer to it, so everyone can use it. Now, I'd note that this form of consultation is a particularly niche view of what it is that we're doing. It's a lot easier to use these arrangements to consult with people than it is to use them for much more controversial topics, immigration policy, a whole range of things. Get responses that are likely to be much more difficult to make sense of over time. And I think we need to understand that. It's just that you've got to, like everything, pick the right method for doing the work that you need. But I do think that increasingly what we're going to see is the possibility of using these channels to collaborate with people, not just to consult. It's the notion of maybe we could construct a wiki that would allow us to build a statement of requirement for a particular procurement, starting with the headings, rather than giving people all the information at once and hoping that they would somehow be able to respond to it. The notion that we could have a discussion, for example, about what is the right way to address web standards amongst Commonwealth Government agencies, and start again with that outline and ask people to suggest things that might help us in our work. Now, there are still some interesting challenges in this notion of collaborating with people to build the right outcomes. Some of you would recall the Gov 2.0 task force and the grief that the organisers and involved in the Gov 2.0 task force got around crowdsourcing their logo for the task force. Yes, there was a successful competition for someone to design a logo, but there was a concern that by doing that, it was cutting out the people for whom designing logos is part of their actual business from participating for profit in that work. So we've got some interesting balances, I think, to maintain in how we use social media channels to do that work. We do hear a lot about crowdsourcing various explanations, and some of those things we see work better than others. But the notion that we can better collaborate with people and use that broad information available amongst the community is a strong one in determining how we can use social media. Now, the challenge for us, I think, is to work out where we're going ahead with this. Whoops, too far. Or is there one missing? Look at that. There's a slide missing. The challenge for us is to work out how we're going to take this forward. The notion, or my notion around this, is that we aren't finished in this work. And the idea that somehow only that, I think 5 or 6, well, it must be 6 or 7 years now after Facebook and Twitter were first invented, that somehow we would have all our policies perfect, all our work together, and we'd be using this consistently across 100-odd FMA Act agencies, is to misunderstand the speed at which we want to work and the speed at which we can change in order to adopt new policies. Now, I'm not saying that we've got everything right in this area at all, or indeed, as I said at the outset, that there's a shared understanding of how we should use social media across the public service. But I'm utterly convinced that we're going in the right direction, and I'm seeing this groundswell of use across the public service to get the right sort of discussion going on social media and get the right source of use of these tools in order to promote the work that we're doing, which is essentially serving Australians. Whether we're doing this through consulting people on social media or allowing them to consult us on social media for service delivery, or in policy development, or in advertising opportunities available for business and citizens, this use of this new channel is one that I think is going to continue to drive the work that we're doing into the future. Thanks.
Thank you, John. So many questions. I wasn't being rude, I swear. I was writing things down very diligently. But before I get to my questions, anyone got any questions for John in regards to social media and the public service? Behind you. Behind you.
John, you talked about picking the right method to do what you need to do, and you talked about the themes of connecting, consulting and collaboration. Could you sort of identify which government departments are leading in that regard, in your view?
Aside from mine?
Yes, of course. That's a given.
So I think it depends on how they're using it. We've seen a lot of use of, particularly by human services, in a range of areas in terms of correcting faults, things are wrong on websites, where they've been involved in communities and have sort of become involved in them and introduced themselves and corrected things that are wrong. I think it's one of the very interesting things is the notion that you can respectfully and quite impartially correct errors on websites by pointing to the right evidence or the right information. And I think Human Services has done a lot of work in that regard. I think so that's useful. I think the ATO's use of explanatory videos around filling out tax is a good example of that. I think immigration's use of IMI-TV and getting messages across on YouTube is also a very strong example of that. But there's a range of departments, what's now social services, using the Line website to engage with younger people, and not just a Facebook page essentially, but also a Twitter account and things like that, and engaging with people, young people, about the sort of problems that might be more that they might better relate to is another good example of that. There's a whole bunch of these examples all the time.
Thank you. And just one more question. Talking about the older generation, there's a lot of stats saying obviously older people are getting online and using a range of channels like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. But this, when you come down to practical terms, you don't see necessarily, it doesn't translate a lot. So I'm just wondering what we're doing in that regard to try and use these channels to target older Australians who are potentially travelling and accessing services.
So let me answer your question from a different point of view. I think what we need to be aware of is, rather than try to manage people just according to their age, we should look at, I think, their circumstances. We should be concerned about a digital divide that doesn't just affect people at a particular age, but might affect people with less connectivity, people who are disabled, and those sorts of, that broad understanding of people who might not have access to these channels the same way everybody else has. And I think what you see in the use of these channels across government is the notion that this can move our resources. So by using these more immediate and, let's face it, often cheaper channels to communicate with the people who can use those channels, we're able to put more funding to cross that digital divide and provide the services to people who still need services who can't get them this way. And whether those people are aged, whether they're disabled, whether they're just in remote locations, I think that enablement of using social media channels to address one problem, to free up resources to address another one, is the way we ought to be thinking about that.
John, I might go to a web question first before we get to yours. Of course, if you're following us on Twitter, it's #IPAA social media. So the question is, how do you see the double standard of seeking to elicit frank feedback from stakeholders and the public with the view that public servants are not able to express their personal opinions, as evidenced by the recent sacking of a Department of Immigration staff member?
You wouldn't be surprised to know that I think that the APSC Circular 1 of 2012, which describes the way that public servants can communicate externally, either online or offline, describes the way I think we should go about doing things. Without talking about any individual cases whatsoever, it's my view that any company, any organisation, that if you spent your time bagging your organisation and bagging its policies, that there might be some problems with your ongoing employment in it, I don't think are particularly surprising. Now, there are opportunities that you can take to do a whole range of things, and the public service guidance is very clear regarding the fact that people can be involved in political comment, can be members of political parties, and things like that. And I think that's perfectly fine. In reality, the public service principles about being impartial, about making sure that you can provide the service to the government of whatever political side it might be on, and you can do those things impartially and respectfully, is an important part of our work, and I don't have any problem with that whatsoever.
down the front.
Hi, John. Damien Battison from Department of Education/Employment. I wanted to ask a question to your views around APS leadership and encouraging APS leaders to be involved in social media. Your personal experience with your Twitter handle, Shero58, you know, and I noticed that people are actually quoting you on the hashtag under that handle, but you've also set up recently the AusGov CTO handle. So I'd like if you can share with us some of your experience with distinguishing between the personal and the, I guess, the role-based official social media account. And more than that, how do we go about more and more encouraging APS leaders to, I guess, establish a presence in social media under their official role and distinguishing between the personal and the official? Yeah, so if you could just share your thoughts on that.
Sure. I'll take the first point first as to why do I use those two accounts differently. And the reason is quite obvious. I think the ability to comment publicly about issues from a personal point of view is a very useful ability to have. And if I filled the AusGov CTO Twitter stream with comments about the Brumbies and the Wallabies, I'm sure people would get cross with me fairly quickly. So I do think there's an ability or a requirement to separate those sorts of things. The notion also that my team might be using that AusGov CTO hashtag to tweet about developments and things like that is a useful one, I think, and that sort of shares that responsibility of communicating and consulting with people in an official status more broadly than if I were just doing it myself. So I think there are good reasons to separate those two things. But some of you may have noticed that I'll often retweet the same stuff or with a slightly different angle on it. And again, I think that's a useful thing in terms of getting communication out and consulting with people. I know that there are a range of examples of senior APS leaders using Twitter, not an enormous number as yet, but I think that's going to happen over time. I think one of the reasonable views that APS senior leaders probably have is that you should only say something if you've got something to say. And the notion, as we heard, some social media channels are more inclined to get people to say something or to suggest that people will say something when they don't have a lot to say. And I think this sort of change over time we're going to see, and we're going to see people taking up those channels. I note, though, that when the best way you could get your opinion across was to write to a newspaper, not a lot of senior public servants wrote to newspapers under their own signature blocks either and tried to correct things. I note that, generally speaking, public utterances by senior public servants through speeches and things like that are to an extent relatively rare, and I think this notion that people will speak when they've got something to say is one we're going to see increasingly across social media over time.
John, what about then using a pseudonym or a different moniker or a different name to put out that same message, much like you would change your name if you were to write a letter to the editor?
I think we saw in Mia's presentation that Facebook knows everything about you completely. And the notion that you can maintain that sort of pseudonymous or even anonymous view on the internet is actually one that doesn't exist. I don't think you can do that. And relying on it is, to my mind, a mistake. I don't think it works.
Yes, just because you can say something sometimes doesn't mean you should. I do it often. All right. Thank you very much, John. Now, I would like to introduce Kate to the stage. Kate will be talking about Indigenous social media case studies. So it should provide lots of opportunities for questions with you from the audience, nothing like being able to interact with something that's actually happened, that it's out there, that's tangible. I think I'm missing a page, but that's all right. It's all good. Sorry? You didn't steal my page. Where's my page gone? All right, Kate Bowmaker. In addition to being the Manager of Indigenous Communication Engagement Section at Social Services, she's also the department's Social Media Network Mentor, providing strategic oversight and advice on social services. She's got various social media accounts, all in her name, I hope. Social media policies and governance arrangements. Please welcome Ms. Kate Bowmaker.
Hi there. So you'll notice that my presentation doesn't have any government logo on it because, as you know, the former Department of Families, Housing, Community Services and Indigenous Affairs has now changed to Social Services. So I'm going to talk a bit about a little bit about a range of accounts that we use to engage people on social policy issues, and that's going to be sort of in the context of the former FACSIA, because we'll be talking about a bit of a case study relating to Indigenous Affairs, which is moving out of social services. So don't get too caught up on exactly which department I'm from at the moment. So it's really great to follow those speakers, and I think the point that John made about we shouldn't be talking about whether government should be using social media, we should be talking about how we're using social media and how we should use social media is really important. In the social policy space, we are very much focused on using social media for those things like collaborating, consulting, informing policy and engaging with people rather than just broadcasting messages. So we've had some really great achievements in that space, also some really significant challenges in allowing conversations to open up around some really important but sometimes contentious and sensitive issues like anti-violence behaviour, women's issues, families, things like that. So I'm just going to talk today, I guess, about how we've used social media as a communication tool. And in the context of social policy, so we use it to inform policy, influence people and inspire people to talk to each other about social policy and address some of those social issues that are out there. And as I said, then I'll do just talk briefly about a case study in terms of engaging with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander audiences. So just very, very quickly, social policy in government, so the now Department of Social Services obviously covers a lot of the social policy in government. We cover things like families issues, we work with Department of Human Services on a lot of the payments, welfare reform, those sorts of things, social and economic participation, social cohesion. Definitely closing the gap on Indigenous disadvantage has been a huge part of FACSIA's portfolio and it now is moving into Prime Minister and Cabinet. Giving it, I guess, even more prominence in social society and for government. We deal a lot with issues affecting young people, but also disability carers. So Disability Care Australia was obviously, well, may not be called that now, but will obviously was, you know, sort of came out of FACSIA and is now its own agency. So we have a range of different accounts that we use in our communication strategies. One of the really important things is that we don't use social media as a separate thing. We don't have a social media team or we don't consider social media as being separate to our normal communications. So our communications account managers, so the people who work on families, the people who work on disabilities, Indigenous, they run their own social media. And that's why I guess I have the fortunate role of being the social media network mentor. So rather than having one person managing social media, we actually have probably up to about 15 people in the department who can access social media and who can post and engage with audiences. And then I provide strategic oversight of, you know, what's appropriate, what's not, what our policies are, what our governance structures around some of that are and how we manage risk. You can see listed on the screen all the different accounts that we currently have. As I said, all of our accounts are about engaging with audiences, not just about broadcasting information. And for that reason, our accounts are targeted at specific audiences. So we have an account for Indigenous audience, one for families, we have an account for carers, we have an account for young people, which is The Line, which John mentioned before. We have an account for people with disability, you know, and then we have, you know, events accounts like a national NAIDOC. And I guess in terms of using these accounts, we engage with people all the time, every day, on a range of different social policy issues, but we are an example of where we've used things like budget night, for example, to be able to share with people what's changing in social policy, what new funding is there going to be, and to make sure that people know about that as well. So as much as it is to generate engagement with people, it's also to make sure people are aware what government's doing and what our current policies are. So just before I jump into, I guess, the sorts of content that we use, it's really important, obviously, in the government context that we can show we're managing risk. Our executive in Faxia has been quite, forward in being able to let us set up some of these accounts and talk about some of these issues on social media, but obviously want to make sure we're managing that risk at the same time. So these are just some of the things that we make sure are in place in terms of policies. We do content plans, which we, through our relationships with policy areas, we make sure policy people and people developing policy are looking at these content plans, making sure the content's appropriate. We do regular monitoring and moderation, we share statistics, who's accessing the site, all of those sorts of things. And we make sure that we train other staff in appropriate use of social media. So just back to sort of why we use social media in our communications, it's really about, we find it the most effective way for us to have two-way conversations with people. We talk a lot in communications about ensuring two-way communication, but it's kind of hard to do when you send out a fact sheet or put something on the website and just have it out there as information. So we use social media for two-way communication, and the only other way we find we can really effectively do that is face-to-face, but obviously given the population of people who are families, Indigenous, young people, we're dealing with basically all of society. There's not really a member in society that we don't care about. We do school kids bonus sort of stuff, so whether you're a kid or an adult, we deal with you. So it's obviously unrealistic to think that we would be out there and be able to do face-to-face engagement with people. So this is, I guess, our next most effective way to look at having conversations rather than just broadcasting information. We also, I guess, consider in that context what people are using social media for. So we don't for a second think that all the content we put up on social media everybody thinks is great and engages with. What we try and do is make sure we're not just broadcasting messages about government, we're actually trying to talk to people in the context of what they use social media for. So particularly in things like, people use it to talk to their families and friends. So we try to look at content that they would talk to families and friends about, linking it back, I guess, to social issues and social policy, so that, and including links and things, so people are driven back to information if they take a particular interest in an area. But we're very, I guess, mindful that people don't necessarily want to interact with government information. As you can see there, it's right down the bottom, second last. And so, we try to interact, I guess, with people in people's own settings. So just quickly an example, before I go into the Indigenous case study, of how we are starting to communicate on social media with young people. Now, the Line is a campaign, it's a very well-resourced campaign, so for all those government people out there, you can see there's almost, I think there's about 70,000 people liking the Facebook page and things. That high number is as a result of a fairly high, well-resourced campaign. But I guess the really important thing about the Line is that it is a platform for us to engage on social policy issues with young people without them really knowing it. It sounds bad, but I guess it's a way that we can talk to young people in a setting that's their own, in a setting where they talk to each other, and we can learn from what issues are affecting young people, like violent behaviours, difficult relationships, and then we can think about how, and work with our policy colleagues on how we need to develop policy around that, and also how we need to communicate about policy to young people. So the idea is we use, this kind of design. It doesn't look government, but as you can see, we still have Australian government on the page to make it very clear to people that when they are interacting on this site, the government is there. We are watching that conversation. Just as an example, I guess, of how we, within the Line context, actually target our messaging and our communication for young people and have those conversations rather than it being broadcasting government messages. So you can see here that this is the sort of content that goes on the Line, and we have external moderators and an external company that helps us with this content. But you can see the sorts of messages are for people to have a conversation with each other, and we find that they very much do. We also find that because of the type of content on there, it's people self-moderate and the community moderates itself. So one thing that came out of the initial phase of the Line was that we actually came up with the Twitter handle that's XTL, which means that's crossing the line. So if people were having conversations on Twitter or on Facebook where, the conversation was going the wrong way, people could actually say, well, that's crossing the line. And we found that was happening a lot. We then could also use it to pose questions, if you do this, is this crossing the line? And people could respond, yes, that's crossing the line, no, that's not crossing the line. So I guess it's a sort of a more interesting way for people young people to discuss social policy issues. The other types of engaging content we use is, for example, on our Australian Families page. So the Australian Families page sort of brings in all of the social policy, including Department of Human Services, some of their payments and things like that, into one central page that targets families. So it's not meant to be just about one policy or another policy, it's actually about the audience. So what we share on there is a whole range of different government policy targeted at families. We use engaging content, and sometimes you can see there, the "you mean to tell me" sort of photo. It's meant to be funny. It's not really obviously meant to share, or it does share government information, but it's meant to get people to like that and to engage with that. And we actually found in the context of that particular photo, "you mean to tell me," a lot more men engaged with that because they like those sorts of funny photos, and whereas generally women are using the families page to get information, men will get on there if we post something that's kind of really funny. In the Indigenous space, we very much use videos, pictures, promote events. It's all about what's happening out there in the community. In terms of content, we rarely just share information for information's sake. So the other thing that we do, which we found has been really good for social policy in particular as well, is collaborating, both with other government departments and with non-government organisations. So this is where I guess the way that our accounts are set up, because they're focused on the audience, on families, on Indigenous people, on carers, it doesn't have to just be all FACSIA or social services content. It can be any government department's content, and for example, over the election we put the Australian Electoral Commission's content on our Indigenous sites, because while their social media may have been reaching a lot of mainstream society in the sort of more regional and remote Indigenous audiences, they weren't necessarily reaching them, so we could help them in that way. It means for things like National Reconciliation Week, we could collaborate with Reconciliation Australia, a non-government organisation, about the themes that they were using for Reconciliation Week, driving people, I guess, back to our Closing the Gap and our government websites to see what we were doing during Reconciliation Week as well. So just on to a very brief case study on our Indigenous pages. I guess this is an area where a lot of people may think, may not have thought that engaging with Indigenous audiences would be something that was really effectively done on social media and online. Obviously, there's still a lot of remote communities that can't access online content and social media content, although with the rollout of more digital capability, that's definitely becoming more possible to do. I went out to a remote community about an hour from Alice Springs a few months ago, and they said, if you just provided us some information on our phones, then we'd be able to access that and get that. So people are actually really looking for this sort of content in the Indigenous space. It is evolving though. It's not as big as our families accounts, our disability accounts, because people are still, it's evolving. We're thinking about how to use it. We're thinking about how to engage that particular audience group. We found out that, interesting, probably not so good for me for Facebook, but we've actually found that for Indigenous audiences, Twitter is a really highly used platform. So, but we are still going through and I guess testing a lot of our platforms. The ones that we use at the moment is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube are our 4 primary channels, and they all work together. So if we post something on YouTube, obviously we put something out on Facebook, Twitter, so basically our accounts are always working together. I guess an important thing in the Indigenous space as well is that we use it to connect with key influencers who can then go out and might do the face-to-face discussions, or non-government organisations who are then having the face-to-face discussions. We don't expect to reach all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through these platforms. It's about getting to the key influencers. We also really take the opportunity to share community stories, because that's a really important way for closing the gap on Indigenous disadvantages, empowering audiences to share their stories about where they've achieved things and getting other communities and areas to say, well, maybe I could do that as well. We make sure that it supports our other communications as well. Obviously, we still do a lot of products. We do a lot of DVDs and different things, and our social media supports that. It also supports things like constitutional recognition, promoting events, and getting sort of some of those issues out there. So as I said before, Twitter's actually our most used platform. It's about 6,000 followers. And we use that very much to connect with service providers and key influencers. These are sort of some of the range of those key influencers in the Indigenous space that follow us and often retweet our information. And when I say our, this is whole of government, which I'll touch on very quickly. We also use Facebook. Now on Facebook, we don't put media releases on Facebook. We don't share government announcements on Facebook. We really only use our Closing the Gap Facebook account to share personal stories, and we found that's been really effective. People like and comment on those stories, and when someone sees their story on Facebook, it's really, really powerful. Instagram's the same thing. It allows us to showcase community events while we're at the event, share that with people, get other people sharing it, interacting at those events in a really visual way, which research we've done in Indigenous communications is that all the really effective communications needs to be visual. YouTube is the same thing. We're just rebuilding our YouTube site at the moment and actually trying to not just put videos from government up there, but try and pull in some of those non-government videos so that there's a central place for people to really learn about what are some of the things happening out there in the Indigenous space. So I mentioned before that the way we use the indigenous.gov.au social media channels is whole of government. So indigenous.gov.au is whole of government, Closing the Gap is whole of government. So we very much work with different agencies and share content. We don't have enough content just in FACSI and our social services to even be relevant enough to audiences. So we try and get content from all different agencies and share it over this platform, which is great for us, but also really great for our audience, because then they feel like there's one place they can go to get all of that information. Just very quickly, on the Indigenous, it's very different to something like The Line. We have absolutely no budget for social media in Indigenous communications. What we do is we really focus on how we grow a community on a shoestring, and that's really all about knowing when to publish. So we focus, this is a bit of a formula, I guess, probably out of Facebook itself, but looking at making sure we're interacting on our site regularly and posting regularly, looking at even though Indigenous audiences prefer images and those sorts of things, I think the Facebook formula often picks up more text-based things to share more on newsfeeds, so using more text-based things as well. And knowing when to publish. We know most of our Indigenous audiences that we're trying to reach are on social media on weekends and on Friday nights, whereas in our families space, our highest interaction is on like a Wednesday. So just thinking about when to post so we get the maximum reach without having to spend any money on advertising and things like that. And again, it's just about, I guess, that the content being engaging. Very much we rely on following our key stakeholders and having our key stakeholders share information and mentors. There's a lot of Indigenous leaders, mentors out there. If they share our information, it one, gives it credibility, and two, gets it out there into their networks. So just, I guess, the end of the case study is that we have had success over the last 12 months. As I said, we're still growing in this space. We're still learning, but just in the last 12 months, significantly increased our Facebook likes and our Twitter followers, and importantly, the way we've used social media to interact with our website and other communications means we've significantly increased our website traffic from Indigenous audiences. That's it.
I find it very hard to believe that procuring a date is below conversing with governments, but anyway. I guess the difference between the message that you're trying to get across, and we talk about being authentic, and for me it's a key point, I guess, with social media, and I guess that's the great thing about The Line and Closing the Gap is being able to share your stories, and it adds to the authenticity of the message. Otherwise you do just sound like you're pushing an agenda. All right, I'm going to go to a web question now, Kate, if that's okay. And I heard your Twitter going off there, which was great. So at DSS, social media is integrated in the strategies. What were the hurdles to get the sites across the line?
The hurdles were working with our policy areas to get them comfortable with what sorts of content and information we would share on social media, but also then who would respond to questions and comments and how we would do that, and how we would make sure that the responses were cleared and appropriate. We found it very interesting because you know, a media release might take you know, or a product might take a day to get cleared, but we can't have that in social media. We have to, you know, respond very quickly to comments. So that's one of the things that a hurdle we've faced with our executive and with a lot of our policy areas, who have been a bit concerned about how we would interact with people when we post information up as part of our communication strategy. What do we do then if we get negative comments? But through training, working together, and just and putting it into the communication strategy, showing there's a content plan, showing there's a way to manage that risk, has been what's, I guess, gotten us over the line. And then as we've shown successful examples, more and more people have been willing to do it.
Fantastic. All right, thank you very much, Kate. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Steve Davies. Steve is a former public servant of more than 30 years, working in various roles. He's also the founder of Ausloop. Now, Steve's mission is to engage Australian public servants and community colleagues to network and improve the present and help shape the future. I'm sure Steve has a lot of interesting things to talk about. Please welcome Steve.
Okay, I'll just use this to move the slides, don't I? Okay, okay. And Kate's example was wonderful. Best one I've seen. Okay. For some of us, I was reflecting on what I was going to say here. For some of us involved in the social media space, and indeed some of this goes back to the activities around Gov 2.0, I think there was a strong sentiment that this was going to open up some sort of communications utopia. Now, I'm not saying everyone thought that, but, you know, some of us do passionately. That's probably one of the areas that, well, the public service or public service agencies, you know, that we do sort of live in a bureaucracy. I think they find that difficult, because if you say you've got a communications utopia, what would that be for, well, certainly most of the people I've spoken to? Authentic, open and fearless communication. So the fact that you get a hostile tweet or a bit of criticism online to your agency, well, you know, it doesn't mean you actually don't do it, and that's why I particularly mentioned Kate's stuff. Now, what I see through my work is that in the public service there's a strong element of dystopia, and that really comes from the Australian Public Service Commission. And in particular, I'm referring to the provisions that say, you know, if you are so harsh in your criticism that it might bring your agency into disrepute or bring the APS into disrepute. Now, it doesn't actually say what sort of criticism, so that's one moot point. But the other is, I mean, in my lighter moments, I often think it's somewhat of a joke. I mean, are they really saying that our institutions, long-lived institutions that are robust, are going to come crashing down? So it raises some important questions. I think it's unhealthy, but I think what that mindset, which is what it's a reflection of, does, is it robs us of a capability. And I'll refer back to one of Mia's points, that, you know, social media is not new, the technology is not new, it's been with us a long time. We have had years and years to build a widespread and deep capability amongst or against people in APS agencies, not just comms practitioners. So, in part, that's where I'm coming from. What I want to do in this is take a broad sort of sweep through stuff. Open data we tend to feel quite comfortable about, charts, numbers, and so on, as long as it's not, classified, etc., etc. So the number of data sets online are increasing, as are the number of FOI requests. So we tend to feel comfortable with that. What we're seeing, though, in relation to open data is that community expectations are increasing. They don't want a crude spreadsheet anymore. They want something they can play with. And certainly overseas, and I can see it emerging here, is that there are citizens out there active online. So you're facing this prospect of everyone sort of becoming a researcher, looking at your data, and especially if they're journalists, etc., etc. My sort of favourite topic. Another element in this, of course, is the WikiLeaks phenomenon. And if you look at the number of, well, quite a few other entities are emerging, and we're sort of trying to break in on that business, as it were. Certainly, mainstream media makes use of the sort of information that comes out of WikiLeaks. Now, I think if we desensationalise that aspect of information and disclosures being made, what we've got, although some of them obviously are controversial, but what we're facing is an environment where providing feedback and disclosing information is actually becoming the norm. Certainly some of that information governments don't like having disclosed, but such is the nature of the beast. I think we have to recognise within that this part of the social media environment, if you like, actually contributes to transparency and accountability. And I don't see them going away. So we end up, from people I've been talking with, this notion of citizens grabbing stuff and seeing stuff and then commenting upon it. So essentially they become investigators. So you've got that sort of mix there. How I see social media is it really is the engine room that's driving those two phenomena forward, so that people can now, both those data and the exposure of stories are rich sources of content for people to comment on social media. And so when they relate to government and public service, I think it's fair to say that they're very, very powerful, which is probably why essentially public servants are being told to shut up online. Yeah, the 99% movement, or Occupy. Bit of a failed movement, really, in my book, but the slide illustrates the point. When we're in an environment where any citizen, any group of citizens, employees can criticise online, can comment on richer sources of information online, can comment on disclosures, etc., etc. That's a very potent mix. I think the difference is that people who are active in that way are self-authoring, so they're not going to be scripted, as it were, by corporate speak. So it's a very wild and free environment. Looking at that, and certainly from people I've spoken to and the work that we've been doing, is that in essence, courtesy of social media and courtesy of that broad social technical sweep, we are facing, the public service is facing an age of radical transparency and accountability. And again, I think that explains the defensive routines that are emanating from the bureaucracy. about a third of my background is in HR, and the dream used to be that HR would usher in this sort of golden age of learning organisations and so on. And essentially that function has now become the policing function within an agency. So again, they're part of this. It's extending into agencies, saying be careful what you say online, or better still, don't say anything at all. Where I see the implications for how we communicate and who we communicate with in all of that is communications practitioners becoming facilitators of open dialogue in conversations. You're not going to get that from HR anymore. They're too busy shutting it down. So I think that is the major implication of where social media is going, is not only how we communicate, etc., but we need to be more open about it, build a solid capability, and it's communications practitioners that essentially offer the platform to empower, equip and enable all employees to communicate online. And the reason I'm pushing that issue a bit is that with the volume of information out there, once you enter an environment where you do start to open up, you actually do need a big pool of people who know how to engage in an authentic manner online. There's a bigger issue behind this, I think, and now I can put my glasses down, I didn't need them, is that one of the issues is when you go government, community, public service, and you look at the utterances that come out, we tend to conflate. You can see it in the report in the Canberra Times today. What we tend to do, and government obviously plays a part, is to go, this person was sacked, say, from the public service, and then you go, oh, because they were talking about government, right? So we conflate the two issues. As I've read some of those tweets, and they're not criticisms of government policy per se. What they are accounts of events, right? Stuff that actually happens, and it's the public service that makes stuff happen. So I want you to imagine this, and this hooks into the presentation. You've got a sort of a scale, government, the community. So that's a sort of elastic scale, and it's shrinking. And the reason it's shrinking, the gap between government and the big wide world out there, is because of the pressure that's being exerted via social media. So in that sense, yeah, people are coming to get you, right? So the question becomes, the big challenge, I think, in terms of the public service, in where it positions itself, how it communicates, etc., is that is the public service so close to government at the expense of its proximity to the community? And if that's where you want to be, that's all well and good. But if you've got the steamroller of social media and etc. barrelling towards you, then you better go and meet it. So that's my take on all of this. Questions?
Any questions in the audience?
No questions? No.
We've got a question up here.
Oh, hi. I'm Michaela Banerjee, who's the subject of the ongoing case.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something that I was very interested to hear you talk about, the conflation of issues. I think that that's a very, very important thing. People are asking me, well, why are you dissing your employer? And I need to remind people who ask me that question that this is not about dissing the employer. This is about having a responsibility to the public, as a public servant, because public servants' loyalties go both ways, in my view. I think it's a failure on the part of public servants if they don't at least acknowledge that public servants are different have different responsibilities from people who work in other organisations for profit in private companies. The other thing that is really important to realise and understand is that what we're talking about here is an implied freedom from the Constitution for every person to be able to personally, at all times, engage in political communication. That is at the heart of what is going on here. So the question for us and for all public servants, what's happening here is relevant to every one of you who are here. It's relevant for other agencies as well. The APSC guidelines are ambiguous and they are contradictory and they conflate matters. And in the end, what happens is that they distill to the one single prohibition. You are a public servant and you must not criticise government at all times. That is the problem.
Is that the problem or the rule? I guess, Steve, it comes back to your analogy of being elastic, whether the government moves to the people or the people move to the government in terms of social media.
Yeah. I mean, I actually agree with Michaela 100%. Years ago, going back to the mid-90s, we were reforming management in the Northern Territory public sector. Used to work for the Office of the Commissioner of Public Employment up there, and one of the things that we know, well, one of the things that we actually did, we discovered that we had to address middle and senior managers redefining problems, or even better, for some of them, I guess, shooting the messenger. Now, we hooked into Professor Dick McCann and co, and had some of this goes back to the work of Chris Argyris, where there are layers of conversation, and this is how. I'll be brave here. This is what the APSC should have done years ago. There's some stuff that we know should not be discussed openly, either because someone's going to die or because it's national security. Fair enough. Between that, there are whole layers of conversation where, if you say to people, "Do you feel comfortable talking about that?" No, but let's find out the rules behind it, right? And it's those unwritten rules, once you tease them out, that you can actually make objective decisions and find a point of comfort or a band of comfort that says to people with confidence, yeah, it's okay to talk about this stuff. What we've got in the Public Service Act, even in the amendments at the moment, is basically an ambiguous tripwire. So someone can have put a quite innocuous tweet up, but if somebody else doesn't like it, someone in a position of power above them doesn't like it, it can become, right, you've breached the APS Code of Conduct. Okay? So until that fundamental conversation about what can be discussed online, not the specifics of it, because, quite frankly, I can't see why, if something happens to be a bit embarrassing for someone in a department, quite frankly, so what? So what at the end of the day? So it's that methodology, and I think maybe some comms people should go and have a play with it, or if they want to contact me, I'm happy to provide some information. Any more questions? Yep.
We have to, well.
I'm just wondering about following on. Thank you. Following on from your statement that you made, I just wondered, I understand what you were saying about social media is not new. It is still often referred to as innovative and new in many government departments.
Yep.
And the risk-averse nature of how people approach things. If someone says something so-called inappropriate in the office space, or perhaps puts up a mocking cartoon of their minister in the office space, that is taken on board as being normal office practice. If that was said online, anonymously, therefore that would come on, it has a higher profile because of social media.
Yeah.
That's my observation. I was just very interested to hear what anyone in the panel thought about that. Is it the channel of communication which is causing the fear, if you like?
Yeah, they're afraid of the amplification.
Why is that?
Because more people might hear it and give it perceived legitimacy. I mean, that's the favourite mantra that comes out of corporate comms area, that they won't acknowledge something because it might give someone perceived legitimacy. I mean, quite frankly, with stuff, cartoons and this, that, and the other, well, if they're not defamatory, well, a bit of stupidity you'd tend to ignore, or go and have a quiet chat with someone if you know who they are, and say, "Don't bloody do it again." Some of these things do not require the heavy hand of corporate bureaucrats. What they do require is common sense and the ability to talk to people, and indeed the ability to actually figure these things out so that we can have an authentically engaged public service. The ideal would be everyone, because of that steamroll that I'm sort of talking about. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're instilling fear, and with that, for all the talk about let's build the capability of the APS, that key capability that's with us now, it's not going to get any better, is being ignored, and in fact, I'd argue, being crushed, and that's unacceptable.
John? It would be hard to define my disagreement with so much of that conversation without taking up the rest of our time this morning. I think I'd refer you to a couple of facts that you might be interested in. Look at Circular 1 of 2012 from the Public Service and determine that, in fact, it says that there's no difference between commenting online and offline. The same rules apply. And if you put up, and it could be determined that you'd put up something that was defamatory to the department inside your department on a notice board, I'd suggest that you would be treated in a very similar fashion to if you had done that online. And I think that's the reality of the situation. Now, it might be that anonymous posting on a notice board is more anonymous than posting on the internet. That's probably true. But the bottom line is that behaviour is treated the same. There's clearly a gradation of the way that people do things and how they're corrected over time, because not everybody is the subject to the same level of action. People do say to people, perhaps you should reconsider posting things like that. Perhaps you should have thought of that. Maybe if you did that the next time. I've done that inside my organisation. I'm sure a whole bunch of other public servants have done that as well. And if I might finish on a somewhat lighter note, I don't think bureaucrat is a pejorative term at all. We need bureaucracy to keep democracy functioning.
I agree with the latter statement, John. I think, but the problem is with a lot of this stuff, where they say harsh criticism, they're leaving out one important element, the truth.
If you look at the guidance, you can read out that it talks about unreasonable criticism of an agency's clients and stakeholders, so harsh or extreme that about the government not having faith in you. It talks about things that can't be justified. All of those things are included in the general principles of the Circular 1 of 2012. It doesn't allow the freedom, I think, Steve, that you've suggested.
We might take this conversation, sorry to interrupt you, offline, if it were, where we can discuss and pick it up later. For now, I'd like to welcome Mr. Prem Vasudevan from the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, and thank you very much to Steve.
Cheers. Good morning. And before I begin, I'd like to thank the Institute of Public Administration for this wonderful opportunity to share the department's insights, the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, how we use social media, how we use it effectively to communicate a range of topics, as well as plans for its use in the future. My name is Prem Vasudevan, and I'm the newly minted social media manager at the department. Prior to joining the APS, I spent 13 years in the advertising business, where I worked with a number of multinational advertising agencies in Asia and here in Australia, developing media-neutral campaigns for a number of blue-chip clients. In my current role with the within the National Communications Branch, I oversee the development of the department's social media strategy, and I'm tasked with the job of advancing and evolving the department's social media presence. Now, to give you a quick idea of the branch itself, it's made up of a number of highly skilled individuals armed with private industry experience, and this makes it a highly dynamic and highly skilled environment. The work that we develop for the department integrates our thinking and capabilities in media production, strategic communications, and internal communications. This integrated approach is also evident in the structure of the social media team as well. It's made up of individuals from strategic communications, media, and print and production. And all this is designed to enrich the work that we deliver for the department. We're proud to be one of the early adopters of social media in the public service, and we've been active in this space since 2008. Now, in terms of where we are, well, our channels are, our presence is felt across 8 different channels, namely Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Flickr, Storify, YouTube, on the GovSpace Environment Migration blog, and on LinkedIn. Our followers include people from across the world who want to come to Australia, as well as people who currently reside in the country. Now, in terms of how we use social media, we use it to inform people about changes to policies, share positive stories about citizenship and social cohesion, promote new online services, as well as correct misinformation. As a department with a diverse portfolio, even with the changes that we're currently undergoing, content creation is dynamic. We populate our calendar ahead of time with input from various policy and program areas from across the department. And this results in work that varies from one-off posts, content that is in support of a wider communication approach, and even real-time execution such as Facebook live chats. Now, although we use a standard response guide when moderating channels such as Facebook and Twitter, we also work closely with various business areas to provide input. 2 staff members, rostered on a weekly basis, post content on departmental channels, moderate, as well as respond to any questions received. So far, our 5-year affair with social media has allowed us to develop strategic executions with some fantastic results. A recent campaign that used social media as part of the wider communication plan targeted asylum seekers. We called this campaign Don't Be Sorry. Now, the Don't Be Sorry campaign was launched in February this year and was created in response to the recommendation of the expert panel on asylum seekers led by former Chief of the Defence Force, Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston. Targeting onshore diaspora communities, the campaign aimed to encourage community members here to discourage their relatives from making the dangerous boat journey to Australia and give them information about regular lawful pathways to immigration. This was a fully integrated campaign that used a number of communication touchpoints, such as in-language advertising on ethnic television, radio, press and online outlets, limited mainstream press advertising, and a strong social media presence. Community engagement also played a major role as part of this campaign. Social media posts about the campaign were published on the department's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube accounts. We also used cross-platform promotion through links to relevant external sites that rounded off the experience. By using different social media channels, we were able to control the flow of content and promotion, prompting conversation, feedback, knowledge, insight, and experience sharing. The interaction our posts generated proved that social media was and is an effective way to engage with the community. Now, post-campaign analysis revealed that YouTube was the most successful out of all social media channels used, with more than 686,000 views of campaign videos from February till June 2013. We also saw positive numbers from using Facebook. As of 21st June 2013, the average reach for campaign-related posts was 13,826 individuals per post. Impressive numbers, and proof that posts of a visual nature tell a story better. Video took center stage again with the recent Instagram campaign that Mia mentioned earlier. Although we could not promote it for a longer period because of the recent caretaker period, we still managed to obtain some fairly good numbers. In little over a week, the Instagram campaign attracted 10 videos on Instagram. More than 23,000 people saw our Facebook posts, and this attracted a large engagement, or a total engagement level of 1617. A total of 160 tweets, 31 retweets, and 14 mentions attributing the hashtag #AusSidsDay. And we received a total of 12 media mentions across regional and metro outlets, as well as on community and government-based websites. It was a good first effort, and it opens up Instagram as a viable channel for the department for future use in terms of community engagement. So in a nutshell, our approach to social media has been about broadcasting information, engaging with clients, sharing the positive work we do, as well as supporting major communication campaigns. Above all, we are pushing the envelope with how we use social media to strike meaningful and authentic conversations. We've been doing these things well. However, we have plans to expand our presence and further improve our engagement. So what's on the horizon? We have identified a number of improvements, but I'll touch base on 4 major plans we have in store over the next 12 months. To ensure we're talking to the right people in the right spaces, we'll soon be looking at trialing Google Plus to be used to customize and optimize the department's presence within Google, including both Google Ads and Google Search. When it comes to analytics, we rely on built-in tools offered by Facebook and YouTube and applications such as Hootsuite and Statigram to track our engagement. Although these provide us with a good understanding of how we are tracking every month, we've reached a level of social maturity where we need to dig deeper to understand where conversations about the department and its work occur. We will soon be using Oracle's cloud-based social relationship management service. This will provide us with a one-stop hub for all things related to listening, analyzing, as well as publishing content on relevant channels. We're also looking at improving our customer service offering. Currently, clients are using our Facebook page to ask questions about their visa, about the status of their visa application. The Oracle service provides a solution that enables us to establish a help desk app on Facebook, where clients will be able to search through our list of FAQs. If in the event they can't find what they're looking for, they can simply send in their specific question from the app, and this then turns it into a ticket on the back end and gets sent to a specified email inbox that is managed by client service staff. Finally, to further improve uptake and acceptance of social media across the department, we will be engaging with key business areas on the importance and potential benefits of using social media and appointing a social media champion for each branch or division to help coordinate responses to questions received, as well as to work with us in developing initiatives and events using social media. We are excited by the prospects, no doubt, that social media provides us now and in the future. As evidenced by the case studies I've shared with you earlier, we are convinced that social media does make an impact on communications. Before I end, I'd like to thank once again the Institute of Public Administration for providing me with an opportunity to share our department's insights, the Diva Theatre for providing an excellent facility for today's event, the speakers, John Sheridan, Mia Garlick, Kate Bowmaker, and Steve Davies, and to all of you for taking the time out to make it here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prem. Now we have time for one question. And lucky first row. Do we have a mic for you, sir?
Hi, Prem. Welcome to the social media role in Department of Immigration. We've learnt recently that Sandy Logan's Twitter handle, which was formerly used as a bit of a spokesman handle for the department. Are you able to tell us a little bit about, the rationale and or what is the official immigration Twitter handle that replaces that conversation that Sandy was having, and or anything you might be able to share around that issue?
Okay. Look, I'm not privy to some of the deeper conversations that have been happening in the government space, but the minister was quite clear from the onset that they would front or they would be acting as the spokesperson or the spokespeople per se, whereas the department would continue using its Twitter presence to promote programs and to promote good news stories and things that we develop from a policy perspective, as per what we've been doing currently. So with the recent changes, we've updated our handle to DIBP Australia, so it's not DIAC Australia.
Thank you very much for your time, panellists and audience. The discussion will continue. If you want to do so on Twitter, use the hashtag IPAA social media. Tonight, if you want to see that work in action, I guess it's the 6th ACT Twitter cabinet that's happening this evening. So if you want to see whether or not the Chief Minister can answer all your questions or broadcast a message in blanket form, or whether you actually get something out of it, it is an interesting conversation. You do get the occasional nutbag that asks about their pothole to get fixed out the front of their house, but that is the measure of the public space with Twitter on social media. I would like to take the opportunity to promote the IPAA 2013 National Conference that's happening in November. The program is now available on the website. All attendees are in for a high-value professional experience as they experience the breadth and wisdom of the invited speakers, very much like what you enjoyed today. Make sure you like and follow IPAA ACT on Facebook and Twitter for the latest news and updates. Now, as part of the conference, we're running 2 competitions. One is seeking new ideas for original policy initiatives or public sector innovation that could make the public service smarter, better and broader. Now, the pitch competition it offers you the opportunity to give a 5-minute elevator pitch to an audience of influential public sector decision makers at the 2013 National Conference. So 5 presentations, 5 minutes, 5 big ideas. Participants can either enter in either all ages stream or a young professional stream. So finalists will receive free conference registration, and the winner will take home $500 and a year's IPAA membership. So make sure it's your chance to shine if you ever wanted to get on that Will Anderson show that he keeps changing the name of. The competition closes on Friday, the 11th of October, so hurry up and get those good ideas, get those juices flowing. There's also a second contest, which is a photographic competition, which is entitled A Day in the Life of a Public Servant. So be creative, don't be scathing. Make sure your entries are in by Thursday, the 31st of October. If it's a Feet Tuesday hashtag you want to put on, that's the day in the life of your public service, then I would like to see that. For all information is now available on the conference website. Go to ipaa.2013.org.au, or of course, again, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Other upcoming events: on the 25th of September, there's an evaluation training program, managing and conducting evaluations. And on the 22nd of October, there's a public interest disclosure, strengthening integrity. It would also be here at this theatre and live streamed. So this concludes that will be the last monthly seminar, for the year, as they prepare for the 2013 IPAA National Conference. Make sure you remember that website, act.ipaa.org.au. When you return to the office, you'll receive a present in the form of a survey via email. These are excellent. These help us make us do things better. So please complete it, as it does assist in planning events for your professional development for the future. So thank you again for attending today. Thank you to our dear colleagues for the live stream and the recording of this event today. Your facilities are absolutely amazing. I wasn't joking when I was saying I'm filming my cooking pilot here, because it's absolutely, we've got to figure out the smoke situation, but they are first class, great, high quality standard facilities here, and you're extremely lucky to have them. Recordings, of course, of this event today will be available early next week at the website. Go forth and tweet. Enjoy your day, and make sure you look up at the sunshine when you do enjoy the day and tweet about it. But we'd love to hear from you via Facebook. You'll hear from me, I guess, on Mix 106.3 via the Facebook as well, or from 5:30 to 9 weekdays. Thank you very much.